A single word from one of America's closest allies. And just like that, a shockwave rips through the entire global economy. This story is about a quiet no that is now echoing from Wall Street all the way to Tokyo. And believe me, it's about a lot more than just some failed trade deal.
So let's just start with the number, because it is staggering. $1 trillion. According to the first wave of estimates, that's the value that just, poof, vanished from global markets and future forecasts right after Japan made its decision. A number that big, well, it needs an explanation.
But hang on, we need to be really clear about what this number actually means. This isn't cash being lit on fire or money disappearing from bank vaults. No, this $1 trillion represents all the future growth, all the investor confidence, the pure economic optimism that the markets were literally banking on. And then, in a flash, it was gone. This is what a loss of faith looks like in dollars and cents.
Which of course brings us to the central mystery here. I mean, on the surface, this deal promised enormous benefits. So why would Japan, a country known for being cautious, for its incredibly close ties to the US, why would they walk away from what was being hyped up as the deal of a lifetime?
To get to the bottom of it, we have to start with the deal itself. It was pitched with, let's say, a signature boldness. A multi-trillion-dollar agreement that was supposed to completely redefine the balance of power in global trade. It was a huge, ambitious play to pull the world's economic center of gravity back towards the United States. And this deal, well, it really had two faces. The public pitch was simple, boost American exports, bring back jobs, easy to sell. But the strategic goal, the part behind the curtain, was way bigger. To get allies like Japan to form a massive economic bloc that could finally stand up to China's growing power. But here's the thing. While Washington was basically patting itself on the back for this grand vision, analysts over in Tokyo were doing something else. They were reading the fine print. And what they saw was different. As one senior Japanese economist put it pretty bluntly, the whole thing felt less like a partnership between equals and more like a list of demands, a purchase order. So look, Japan's hesitation, it wasn't some gut emotional reaction. Not at all. It was a calculated, careful response based on some critical details they found buried deep inside the proposal. And these details, for Tokyo, were absolute deal breakers. First, there was this currency clause that Japan was terrified would trap its economy, basically tying its hands in a future crisis. Second, a tech sharing part of the deal that felt a lot less like sharing and a lot more like a quiet way to grab their intellectual property. Third, the whole thing was seen as a major test of their national sovereignty. And finally, it would lock Japan into decades of relying on imported fossil fuels, totally derailing their own green energy goals. And that feeling was captured perfectly by a Japanese lawmaker, who reportedly said this in a private meeting. This is not a deal, it's a declaration of dependence. That line apparently spread like wildfire because it just crystallized what everyone was feeling, that saying yes wasn't just bad business, it was a step backward for Japan as a truly independent nation. But even with all of those specific red flags, the rejection really came down to something even more fundamental than any one clause. It came down to a total, complete collapse of trust. For a country like Japan, which plans everything out decades in advance, predictability isn't just nice to have, it's everything. And you can see why they'd be so wary, right? They all remembered 2017, when the US just abruptly pulled out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP, leaving Japan and a bunch of other allies totally scrambling to pick up the pieces. That was a very expensive lesson in American unpredictability, and it's one Tokyo never forgot. The deal was also trying to force Japan into an impossible choice. As one trade official put it, they were being asked to sideline China, their biggest customer, their largest trading partner, all to please the US, their oldest friend and security ally. It was a balancing act they just weren't willing to even attempt.
And this quote from a Japanese trade minister? This gets right to the heart of it all. The fear wasn't just about one president or one administration. It was about the deep, systemic unpredictability of American politics. Japan was simply not willing to gamble its own long-term national stability on a partner that it felt it could no longer predict.
So, Japan walked away. And that quiet, very deliberate decision set off an immediate and powerful chain reaction. This thing stopped being a bilateral issue. It instantly became a global event. The official statement was, of course, very diplomatic. It cited unresolved technical matters. But everyone, and I mean everyone, read between the lines. The message was loud and clear. Japan said no.
And with that single word, the whole idea that America could still just rally the world to its side, well, that idea cracked wide open. The markets reacted in a heartbeat. U.S. markets, energy stocks, the ones that had bet big on this deal, they dipped. But look at the yen. It actually spiked. Investors didn't see this as weakness from Japan. They saw it as an act of economic strength, an act of self-reliance.
And then the political dominoes started to fall. Right away, other Asian nations started calling Tokyo, asking for their reasoning. Over in Europe, leaders began to talk about needing new trade frameworks that weren't centered on a single superpower. And in the middle of all this, China saw a massive strategic opening and quietly started extending new trade offers to Japanese companies.
So what all of this is signaling is a really fundamental change. The era where the world would just sort of automatically line up behind American-led plans, well, that era is facing its biggest challenge in a long, long time. We are entering a brand new phase.
See, for decades, the U.S. benefited from this thing economists call the confidence premium. It's like an invisible currency. Partners signed on to deals because they just believed in American stability and predictability. Japan's decision dealt a massive blow to that premium. The world is now asking for proof, not just promises.
So what comes next? Well, many economists believe we're moving into an era of regional resilience. Instead of one global giant, you'll see smaller, more flexible trade systems built on what you could call clusters of trust. Think of it as moving from one massive global orchestra to several smaller, coordinated bands. And really, this is probably the most important takeaway from the whole thing. Japan's rejection shouldn't be seen simply as an act of defiance against America. It was an act of evolution. It was a quiet declaration that a modern partnership has to be built on mutual respect, on fairness, and, yeah, on predictability. And that leaves us with one final big thought. As all these old structures of global power continue to shift and change, maybe the ultimate measure of a nation's influence isn't its economic size or its military might anymore. Perhaps in the world we're building right now, trust is the only currency that really matters.